Okay, today we're going to talk about simplifying our academic writing. I'm Ken Harvey, and I'm going to turn off my camera now and just go to the screen. So I'm just going to turn that. Let's see, that's the screen, or that's the camera? That's the screen, I think. Yeah, so I'm hiding the camera. Even though you see the camera, it's actually hiding in the final version. It looks dark up here. If you look on here, however, I just turned off the camera, so I don't have to worry about that. But it's actually, when it kind of turns into video, look more like this. The monitors are more accurate portrayal of what they will see than the projector is. Okay. Maybe a little bit about my background, and I am a journalist by trade. Most of my life I've been a journalist, editor and publisher. I bought my first newspaper when I was 25. And before that, I was an editor of a big city newspaper, a weekly newspaper in a big city in Tampa, Florida. So I consider myself first and foremost a journalist before I consider myself an academic. And some people say, well, that's obvious. You're not a very good academic. But anyway, I want to talk about how the principles of journalism can be used in academia. This is a letter that somebody received. Again, this camera's kind of in the way now. I'm just going to try to pull it out of the way, even though it's not producing, it's not being filmed. Dear Mr. X, thank you for submitting your article, Grounds Greet New J-Grads and Magazine Job Market for consideration in Journalism Educator. We have a stack of other articles submitted by professors from around the country, but yours is so interesting and well written that we plan to publish it in the very next edition and make it the lead article, the #1 article in the journal. Would you like to receive something like that? Yeah, you kind of feel like you went to heaven, right? I would like to get letters like that all the time. And maybe a little piece of the article that was written, kind of give you an idea of why the editor responded this way. This is the lead of it. Many magazine editors are not pleased with the quality of journalism graduates being sent out into the job market. Quote, after years of experience hiring junior editors with degrees in journalism, I concluded that we're better off taking English majors. And I know several colleagues who share this attitude, said the editor of Voting magazine, Richard L. Rath. Unhappily, a degree does not guarantee that the recipient understands even the most basic grammar and punctuation. Goes on. Indeed, 57% of the magazine editors recently surveyed agreed that journalism graduates are poorly prepared or not prepared at all to handle magazine editorial positions. And that opinion was shared by small and large publications alike. The editor of Good Housekeeping, John Mack Carter, said the only way he would hire a recent college journalism graduate would be if the individual were the, quote, the offspring of my company president. So, kind of got a little bit of a taste of that article. Why do you think the editor was excited about it? What was it about that article that you think an editor would like?
Maybe perhaps it draws the reader in appropriately without being too wordy.
Mm-hmm. Other thoughts?
Stuff about grammar and punctuation, since he told.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, language use is very important. Mechanisms of language use is important too.
Mm-hmm.
The impression usually is that, well, after reading,
The writing style.
Any other thoughts on why the editor responded the way he did?
It was the offspring of the president.
maybe that's it. It was the offspring of the editor that submitted the article, probably. But how do you think it? However, how do you think it compared to the other academic articles that you read? What's different about that article than other academic articles? Again, any thoughts? Is that the typical academic article you read? The typical academic article start like that?
That letter was an article. Am I misunderstanding the whole question?
The first slide was the letter. After that, it was the actual start of the article.
Oh, okay. Okay, now I got you. Sorry.
Yeah, so when we
Show it to you.
so when we looked at this, that was the start of the article.
Okay. Okay. Gotcha.
So it started off with kind of a summary sentence, very short summary sentence
Yes.
as to what the article is about. Went into a direct quote that kind of represented the content of the article. Went in statistics of some of the statistics that they were going to encounter as they proceeded with the article, but then another direct quote that again reflected the statistics again. So is that the typical academic article?
It should be.
It could be, but I don't usually see them getting to the, well, certainly like a direct quote. How many often, you don't very often get to a direct quote that quick in an academic article. You should hopefully get a summary of what's in the article fairly quickly, but sometimes even those are kind of not that quick. It kind of gradually works you into the information. So it's a little bit different than most academic articles, which is, again, why I think that the editor responded the way he did. Would it surprise you to know that this was written by a 28-year-old researcher who was only in his first semester of his master's curriculum when he wrote the article, and instead he had been a journalism professional before that? How was it written in such a way that might clue you that this was not written, even though it was very well received by the editor, that this was not your typical writer, academic writer? Well, again, do you think, did you ever sign into this? Do you think this sort of approach could be effective for other academic writers?
Also, it was accepted as number one.
Yeah, it would seem to suggest that it could be. Actually, that was me. It was my article that I wrote when I first started my master's program a long time ago. And to say that I was surprised to get that, actually I had a co-author of a professor, but I didn't actually do anything. The typical relationship between grad student and professor. And maybe even less than that, because I was a professional writer already, is that he hardly touched the article. But when he asked me, it was his idea of what to do. Let's survey magazine editors and see what they think of our university graduates. So it was his idea. And then he just said, do it. So I created the questionnaire and I sent them out and I analyzed the data and I wrote the article and he changed about 2 words and we sent it off. And so I knew what I did, and that's not really the point of getting the credit for it, but when he received that letter, I nearly fell over because my biggest fear was, I can't do this. I'm not an academic. I'm just a journalist. I don't know how to do this. And so I could only approach it in a way I would do as a journalist. I didn't know how to do it any other way. So it was my stupidity, perhaps, that led to this. And so I said, okay, what do I need to write a good article as a journalist? So when I compiled the survey, I made sure that I had open-ended questions, but had direct quotes, because a good journalism article needs direct quotes. And a good journalism article starts off with a whammy. It starts off with the most interesting thing at the start. So I had to write it like a journalist. What's the most interesting thing about this? So okay, I'll write my first sentence that way. Get to the quotes, get to the details, get a little bit of data, some statistics in there that are a little bit shocking, and would get people's attention that, whoa, what's going on here? You know, the professionals, the employers are saying we're not doing a good job here, that we're failing, and that was a little bit shocking. And so you had, you know, good content. You had a lead with a strong, what I call a whammy in journalism, something you grab, you know, you hit somebody over the head with to draw them into your story, and then get into some direct quotes to get a sense of the kind of make it more personal, make it more humanized. But this is what real editors say about our students. But they don't like it.
This book.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, that's the other word for it, obviously. It's a hook. Create the hook. So that has you know, affected the rest of my academic career. Like I said, I've kind of gone back and forth. I actually, after I got my master's degree, I was very quickly hired by the State University of New York system to teach at the College of Buffalo. So I did go into academia at that time for a few years. And then I went back into industry again, and didn't really have a position in a university where, at least a research university, until I came here after that. But what do you think? What lessons do you think I drew from this? I did actually during that period of time was the two main journalism publications in the world at that time were both published by the Association of Educators of Journalism and Mass Communication, which is also the main, in America anyway, the main accrediting body. Almost all the major universities in America are accredited by the AJMC. And so their two main, their flagship publications were Journalism Quarterly and Journalism Educator. And at the time, over the period of about 5 years, I was the most published researcher in the country in Journalism Educator, and I was also published in Journalism Quarterly. And so I, you know, this was my first one, and I jumped from there, and with a variety of partners and sometimes by myself, I continued publishing during that 5-year period, and kept kept thinking about, okay, this first one, how did they respond? How can I continue to get published? And so I felt like I learned some lessons from this first experience. What experiences do you think? What did I learn?
If I may say something, I missed, of course, the context here, but maybe what you're getting at. In academic writing, also, you need a hook. You have to get their attention, first sentence, first paragraph. That's what I mentioned 2 days ago or last week. People are busy. They're judgmental. You got attention in the first paragraph.
Okay. What else do you think I learned, or whether it was true or not? What do you think I thought I learned from this? As the case might be.
That you need a lot of you know, quotes or big quotes to be successful, or maybe that's not necessary in academic writing, but in your case, you might have thought that keep going with that, the long quotes.
Yeah, it certainly is going to depend on what it is you're writing about, for sure. But I certainly thought about that as, you know, how can I humanize my academic writing? Because a lot of academic writing is not very humanized.
You rely on your journalist skills, you know the format of writing, and then you apply some academic skills to this, and those both, when they boil together, make the good stuff.
Anything else you think I learned from that?
Humanizing these people.
One thing I learned was I didn't have to learn to sound smart to be published. I thought I had to have a PhD, you know, had to have the initials behind my name, and had to learn all the big words in order to be published. And I didn't know that, gee, I can just, you know, have good content and write the same way I've been writing pretty much. I can just write clearly and simply, and they like this. And I was surprised at that. I like I said, I was shocked by the response because I didn't think I could sound smart enough. I wasn't an academic. I didn't have the initials. I didn't have an MA, let alone a PhD. And so, yeah, in fact, the more I got into it, I started looking at my colleagues when I got into the SUNY system, and I was being published more than the PhDs. And as I looked at their writing and so forth, I started saying, you know what happened here? These guys have lost their ability to communicate. They're so interested in sounding smart, they're sounding confusing. And that people don't like reading stuff like that. They want to read something that they can understand.
Something familiar.
That's right, and something maybe even a little bit skimmable. But if you have to read a paragraph 3 or 4 times to understand what somebody's written, that's not good writing. No matter how smart you are and how smart you think you are and how big a word you use, how complicated a sentence structure you use, guess what? That's not good writing for anybody. And that kind of shocked me. That actually my communication professor colleagues had forgotten how to write, clearly. Or they were journalists at some point. And their PhD and scholars and the whole world of academia had taught them bad habits. They lost their journalistic touch to it. That's what I felt I learned. In fact, I want to do some research on it because I felt pretty, it seemed pretty much to correlate. Those that had been in academics the longest were the worst writers in communications in my department. It was a pretty big department. We had 1,000 students in that university, 1,000 journalism students. And so that was the correlation I could see. The longer they were an academic, the less well they could write, because they started learning bad habits.
So sometimes we have to maintain the guys from the grassroots, like we have that simple.
Yeah, so some of you, I've heard questions, gee, we can't do this. We're not like you. Guess what? I wasn't like you either. You're maybe thinking this is harder than it really is. Just write clearly. Have something good to write about, and then write it clearly. It doesn't have to be that hard. It really doesn't. I recently co-authored this book, technical book, with the title Handbook of Research on Human Social Interaction in the Age of Mobile Devices. What do you think I even liked about what I thought even about the title? What? What is that? It sounds cutting edge. It sounds smart. But I kept telling him, please change the title. Nobody's going to want to read this. And indeed, writing titles, Dennis was talking about this the other day, is that the research shows your title matters. This title is not a good title. I don't know how many people have read this book. I wouldn't bet a whole lot have. I don't know that I would. It's scary sounding. Who wants to read that? So, it does matter. And I could not convince them to change the title for the life of me.
It reads like a PhD title.
That's a PhD title, absolutely. Yeah.
Coming up is from the sort of academic point of view, I find myself very envious sometimes of people. I have a polemical side to me. I get exercise about certain topics, and I want to fire off a letter to the editor. Some people seem to know how to do this, how to compose. I've managed to get kind of little opinion pieces or letters to the editors sent off, but it wasn't easy for me. I have, and I find it frustrating because I have a lot to say on the topic. I have a lot of, background, and yet, and I can write concisely. It's not as if I can't shrink it down to 700 words or 500 words, whatever the limit is. But sort of the knack of, catching the reader, you see. It's something as an academic, not that we've forgotten, we probably have never learned.
Perhaps, and I think maybe I'm forgetting it somewhat to myself. My wife every so often says, just shut up and tell me what you mean. So maybe I've been here too long. I don't know. Anyway, why do you think that writing more like a journalist might be even more important for academic writers who are not native English speakers and are trying to get research published in English language journals? What do you think? Is it even more important for them? Why are we not?
I think they might actually double down on that belief that you used to have, because it's not their language even, their first language.
That's what I found when I read our theses from in our department and stuff. There's a lot of effort to sound smart. They're putting a lot of energy into sounding smart, and I can't understand a word of it. Basically, I mean, it gets so complicated. What do you mean by this? But there's this tendency. I have to sound smart, and so they choose words. They formulate their sentence structure, then their paragraphs, all with the intention of impressing you and me. And they're doing just the opposite. And so we do this, our students do this. It is a very hard habit to break. I remember working on my bachelor's degree. I had that attitude. And I was in my English classes, I was struggling to get the A's I wanted. And I just didn't feel like the English teachers were teaching me what I was doing wrong very well. Oh, yeah, they didn't like this, they didn't like that. They didn't really have a formula. And then I started taking my journalism classes. In journalism class, journalism has a philosophy of getting that hook in there. Writing simply, writing for a 9th grade level, writing so that everybody can understand what you're talking about. Short sentences, short paragraphs, everything short and simple. That's the philosophy of journalism. And so after struggling in my English classes and not getting good instruction from the teachers of what they thought I was doing wrong, I started writing journalistically. And then it became easy for me. And so I also came to a conclusion on that English teachers have no philosophy, therefore they're inconsistent, therefore they can't teach writing. At least they're very frustrating teachers of writing because it's totally inconsistent. And I could not learn from an English teacher what I learned from a journalism teacher.
Yeah. When you mean English, do you mean the university subject, or do you mean composition teachers?
Composition teachers. Yeah.
First year kind of composition.
Yeah, well, first, second year, whatever I had to take in English composition at the university, I just struggled with that. And I did not feel like they were really teaching me. But then, and if you think about it, it really is a world of difference in that, as I said, the journalism has a very definitive philosophy of how to write. It's throughout the industry in America anyway. This is how you write well, journalistically. And so I just started applying that in my English classes, and they liked it. Later on, I told that story to my journalism students, and they started applying it in their English classes. And they said, why didn't anybody teach us this? And they started acing their classes. And a lot of it was just coming down to stop trying to sound smart. Try to sound clear. Have a good subject, have good content, and tell us the story in the clearest and most powerful way you can. And so I've had lots and lots of journalism students tell me the same thing, come to the same conclusion I did, and that is that composition teachers don't know how to teach composition. And it's not so much, and I don't mean to insult. This is my conclusion, my students' conclusion, but I track it back to the fact there's not a consistent philosophy in English composition teaching. And they don't have, and I can make a very clear matrix of what I want, and most journalism professors would agree with it, because that's, like I say, it's almost a universal agreement on what good journalism style is. And so I know we have an advantage of that just by the very nature of our work. But I was frustrated. Many of my students have been frustrated with their English composition. But it comes back to that principle, I was trying to sound smart. That's why I was struggling in my English classes. And I was using, probably like many of you may struggle with, you may try to use vocabulary that you don't have full control over, especially those for whom English is not their first language. You're trying to use smart words, and you don't quite have control. You don't understand the connotations with them. If the denotation maybe, but not the connotations that go with it. And I know my students struggle with this all the time, and they start using vocabulary they don't control. Whereas all they have to do is back up and use the vocabulary they do control. Well, they do understand, they do, they have mastered, and they'd be fine. But they fall into the trap that I fell into and many other people fall into. I have to sound smart. And that is a trap. So, how does journalistic writing differ from typical academic writing? We've already kind of discussed it. We try to write at a 9th grade level. We want everybody to be able to understand it. And so we purposefully dummy down our writing. We want to make it interesting from the very first sentence. We want to, in our case, we do want some direct quotes. We want to humanize it. And so, things like that. And we've kind of already answered these questions. And yet, the third question here, a journalist has to sometimes write about nuclear fusion or whatever. I mean, I come from a city where next to us is the Hanford Nuclear Reservation, where much of the components of nuclear bombs were built between World War II and the end of the Cold War, where they now enjoy one of the most polluted, the greatest pollution of any place in the world, because early on they were just dumping stuff in the soil or putting them in single single layer whatever tanks that are now corroding through and stuff like that. And the water table is being threatened by it. All that requires some discussion of very complicated stuff. And journalists have to handle that stuff. I've written stories, it may sound, I've written stories about how they send little TV cameras into the sewer system to try to find out, how, where there's leakage and how to stop the leakage into the soil and stuff like that. I've written nuclear stories, nuclear terrorism, lots of stuff. We have to make it sound interesting, but in as simple of words and as simple of structure as we can. So I think, some of the advantages of writing more journalistically, first off, it's more readable and even more skimmable. In this day and age where we're being bombarded by information, it's even more important that we write in a way that people can skim, because people are going to skim. We're skimmers. When people say in America, a newspaper in America might be, let's say, 50 pages long, broadsheet. So we're talking about the big sheets. And people say they read the newspaper. That probably meant they skimmed it. They probably, the average is like 5 to 10 minutes in a newspaper. So they didn't read 50 pages of broadsheet of a newspaper. They skimmed the headlines. They looked at the lead of a few of the stories. They read a little bit more for the ones that really interested them. That's how they digest a newspaper nowadays. I think most people are trying. They would like to read their academic articles that way too, to some degree. Maybe not exactly that way, but they're looking to be able to skim and to read quickly, because we're all busy and we're being bombarded by so much stuff. And so it's more readable, more skimmable. As I said, it's more likely to be grammatically correct. That many of you will probably struggle with if you try to use words that you haven't totally mastered, and even we whose first language is English, we get trapped because we want to sound smart, and so we get trapped in the same thing. and I think it's more likely to be published. I want to talk a little bit more about telling the story more powerfully. I actually made this up, but then somebody was teaching a class. I had my students help teach my classes. I assign them different subjects in a textbook and say, okay, you do this chapter, whatever. And so one of them told me that this is the Wall Street Journal formula, the same one that I created. The Wall Street Journal, as you're probably aware, talks about a lot of financial stuff. That's what the newspaper is all about, investments and finances, and it can be pretty complicated stuff. And so they had to create a formula. How do we talk about complicated stuff that people will read? Otherwise, we're going to go out of business along with a lot of other newspapers. And so they started saying, hey, you know, these are the components of a good story. We need them all. We need as many of these as possible to make it interesting. And so they're looking for description and narrative, statistics, yes. They want examples. They want anecdotes. They want to humanize the statistical information. They want direct quotes along with that, and they want graphics to help illustrate it. And so that's the sort of stuff they're looking for in order to make a story on finance or economics interesting to the masses. They're also going to be using the simple verbiage and so forth as much as they can with a complicated subject. So I co-authored a couple of book chapters with students, and this was one of them. And before I get to what I had in the PowerPoint, yeah, this was the original by my student, and she was a master's student, a very good student, a straight A student. This was her first take on her book chapter about a specific. This again, we were talking the other day. I've written a lot of articles for a series of books on NGOs, and so this is about an NGO that runs orphanages. A family is the integral unit of society. It is not possible to diminish its role. No nation, no civilized society cannot live without a family institution, and so forth. What do you think? How do you think I responded to this? Yeah, the journalism editor. What do you think my response was to this?
A little bit stodgy, a little bit trying to impress.
Yeah, kind of, yeah, it was. Let me go back and show you what I did with it. I started with a quote. I think that parents are not those who conceived and gave birth to you, but those who raised you and helped you become a decent person in society, who support you all life long, says Aliyah Akhmetova, a young person raised at SOS Children's Village, Almaty. This is what our SOS mother does. She helps, and will help us always. We are thankful to her for that. I resided in a nice village for 15 years. These were the most precious moments in my life, which I'll never forget. You helped us become a person with a big heart. And then I extrapolated, or actually went the other way, I guess you could say. I went to the statistics after that, what I meant to say. So then we look at how many statistics, how many children they're helping in their orphanage. So we go from the individual to the group, and then the third paragraph, more examples of more children that have gone through this orphanage and what they're doing, how they're succeeding in life. So again, the effort was, let's humanize it. Let's get something a little more interesting at the top than what I showed you before that sounded more, again, trying to impress. And I put it into simple words and try to get to something that people will like sooner. This is another one. Let me, I didn't put this into the PowerPoint. I have it called up someplace else. another student that I co-authored a chapter with brought me this. And she actually is basically more notes than it was an art. She had interviewed a person, and so she kind of put the whole thing into her words. You know, I grew up in a family of intellectuals. Dad was a state official. My mom dedicated all her life to children. You know, going through all her background, looking for, you know, why she ultimately got involved with her efforts to actually, in a sense, close down orphanages is what she's trying to do. She wants to replace orphanages with foster families. But it takes a long time to get to it. I'm not sure that I actually opened up the other version. Don't think I did. So I took that one and made it into this. Like many orphans raised from an early age in a Kazakhstan orphanage, Elena suffered from mental retardation. These children can't be healthy because when they are little, they lie on a bed and just stare at the ceiling, says the founder of Public Trust Happy Family. A foreign couple wanted to adopt her, but officials demanded a lot of money to approve the adoption. When our people see foreigners, they demand as much money as they can, says Mariana Gurina, the organization president, who is also a social activist, journalist, and producer at KTK TV. Fortunately, those people were able to adopt this girl. She's happy in their family. She got married and recently gave birth to a baby. I saw her profile on Facebook. She's incredibly happy. Now she speaks 2 languages, and the fact that she graduated from college is fantastic. The rehabilitation for her was made with great love by her parents. Elena came to life. She flourished. What would have happened if Elena had stayed in Kazakhstan? Mariana thinks at best she might have become a plaster painter, and at worst she might have spent the rest of her life in a mental institution. And then we go into how many children she's helped get 400 children adopted over the years and so forth, got back to the statistics. So again, I tried to get away from the kind of, in that case, it was just a long narrative that didn't get to the point very fast. We want to get to the information, we want to get to something interesting. Again, this isn't a strong academic piece, but I'm just kind of showing this is what a journalist does. A journalist wants to get to the point as quickly as possible and find, you know, and draw the reader into the story. By the way, all of this is being recorded. I mentioned screencasting records everything you show. So I flipped over to a couple of Word documents, back again. It all is being recorded as we go. Another thought that I've learned as a journalist is just start writing. One of the biggest problems with a lot of people in research and in any writing is kind of that writer's block idea. You know, where do I start? I don't know how to start. I can't start. Maybe tomorrow I'll start. Maybe next week I'll start. And it's hard to just get started. And yet, this guy makes an interesting point. I'm going to go ahead and turn to his video, I think. I wonder if we have, well, hopefully we have audio. I don't know if we do. I forgot they blocked video on all the, I should have just downloaded it. Anyway, he has an interesting perspective, and it is just this point that...
This classroom has a connection to YouTube, because this is my class I'm teaching here. It has a connection to YouTube.
Well, you have permission to it, but if it's... This is not connecting, and I know that. So.
They give you a certain time.
Yeah.
You have to ask for it, right?
Okay. Well, anyway, the point that he was making is that writing helps you think at the same time. That if you just start writing what you can write. You're going to rewrite it later anyway. Just start writing. Write your idea. Just write. And that's the hardest part. A journalist has to do that.
Easier said than
Yeah, I mean, every day a journalist has to put out a story. Whether they like it or not, they have to put out a story.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar in my teaching, but I thought about those two things.
But it'd be nice if I had a piece of chalk. Does anybody have a piece of chalk around here? I beg to differ a little bit. I tell my students, do not start writing, because if it's not clear in your mind, it'll come out even worse on paper. But have you as children, you probably had this game of painting by numbers? Yeah. So I do something analogously. When I was, well, in the days before, I'm so old, in the days before photocopiers, I used to write out my notes in longhand. So I would have all of these notes, pages and pages it might be, and then I would assign numbers to them. And I used to spend a whole day, I used to consider it, yeah, I would have maybe between 10 and 20 pages of notes in longhand. And I would consider it a day well spent if I did nothing else, I had no classes, and just took myself to a quiet place in the library and planned out my essay. And so as I look at these notes, I start to see, well, this one, points 2, 5, and 8 can go into chapter 1, and chapter points 3 and 6 and 7 thematically fit into chapter 2. So you already have a visual plan of the structure, how it's going to work. Now some of the notes duplicate, so I used to have a system. If I would use so then I guess I would, wait a minute, forgetting this because I don't do it this way anymore. I would have all that, I would arrange it into chapters, and then stylistically or rhetorically, this might come first, and this might come third, and fourth, something like that. As I'm writing, then I have this numbering system, 4, 5. Sometimes the notes repeat. So if I would use a piece of information, I would strike it off because I've written it onto the page. If I decide I want to use it but in a different place, I would strike it that way. And if I decided I was not going to use it at all, I would do it that way, or maybe this way. Anyway, way of handling the information. But you see, you have a structure and you have a plan. What's going to come first? What's going to come second? And it removes your writer's block, because and it helps also when you're tired. You tend to get writer's block, or I do. Actually, I don't get writer's block. I get tired, which is not writer's block. You're writing, and then you seem to be kind of tired. But then you look at the next number and you remember, oh yes, I remember I put it there for a certain reason, and you just write it in. So it's kind of a mechanical process. But the nice thing about this is everything is structurally, it's nice structurally, everything's in the right place, nothing's forgotten, nothing's repeated unnecessarily, and you don't get writer's block, you just keep going. I do not get writer's block, never have. I get tired, I might, I just don't feel like writing anymore today, but it's not writer's block. This one thing that I do like to see in my students is, even if their English is not very good or their grammar, I do want to see evidence of planning, structuring properly a paper.
Before Constantine adds his, I want to just bounce off this. I do something very similar, journalistically as well as academically. When I'm, like in a journalism story, even though I have to put it out in one day, I very frequently have maybe 4 or 5 sources if it's a good story, and one that's important. And so I have the problem. I have all these notes, and they're overlapping, talking about similar subjects. Then, especially if you go to a city council meeting, they don't even have just one subject. They may have talked about 20 subjects. Now, I didn't take notes on all of them. Some were boring, but I will still have notes on maybe 5, 6 different subjects that they talked about. So I have, a city council has 7 people on a city council, and at least in our city, and they talk about 5 or 6 important subjects. And then afterwards, I get some notes. I go ahead and interview them a little bit more to get a little more details that they didn't mention in the city council. So I have a mess in my hands. And so what I do is I do something very similar to Dennis in that sort of situation, which I still incorporate academically, and that is I basically, in the case of city council, I'll mark everything A, B, C, D by subject. So they talked about higher taxes, they talked about hiring a new police chief, they talked about whatever they talked about. And then I go back to those notes and I say, okay, out of all those that talked about higher taxes, this is kind of a 1 quote. This is a good quote, or this is good information. This is kind of good information. 3, maybe it'll come up and maybe a value for background or whatever. And so then it breaks down a little further than what Dennis is. I have A1, A2, A3, A4. I have B1, B2, B3, B4. I have all these numbered down. And then after that, I say, okay, now I have 5 different subjects. What do I lead with? What's the most important subject I lead with? So I start writing about the most important subject, maybe have another summary that covers B and C, just to introduce it. Then I go ahead and cover subject A, then I go to subject B and C as I go through my story. And so, yes, I agree that you can do a lot of organizing, you can do a lot of pre-thinking by just looking at your notes if you organize them well. Constantine, you had something else you're going to say?
Yeah, again, I'm trying to think about like where most of the people here are with their process. Let's say, for example, they've done some research, they've got something that they can, plot, like they can brainstorm, or at one point just begin and write certain topics or aspects of their paper that they want to produce, and then do that kind of ranking. But with students like mine, where the writing block is an issue of thinking that they don't know how to write paragraphs, I try to get the students first of all thinking that in brainstorming, because we're starting doing a research project and they have a topic, and so okay, they have to brainstorm some ideas and start with something, and then, so we try to make that into an outline. So I'm talking about students, but this could be even for professionals like ourselves writing something. So you have a brainstorm, you try to make it into an outline of a story and put it in the right order, and I help them in that process. But then, if I have the right amount of time, I tell them that like you had said, that writing, when you sit down and write, you don't start with the first word, like Agatha Christie or Ernest Hemingway, and finish with the last word. You write whatever you call them paragraphs, call them sections, call them whatever. You write them, but you should write them creatively. Writing should first be a creative process, because as you also said, that you actually come up with ideas when you write. So you shouldn't block yourself when you're starting to really, put down 100, 200, 500 words. When you're in the flow, you start, and you might not feel good at the start, but then you get rolling, and it starts to come to you. Ideas start rolling, as you said, because you're writing.
Yeah.
So they gotta get writing, and then the hard part, I tell them, is the editing. In making paragraphs and so on. And so I give them a model for how to make a decent paragraph that's very similar to what I read when you started your article. A clear point, some proof of what they were saying, maybe some commentary afterwards. That's a paragraph. But can very often be done more easily as editing rather than sitting and saying, okay, what am I trying to say? Because maybe it won't come. But if you're writing creatively, just with the flow, just sitting and typing or whatever you do by hand, you're more likely to get some quality stuff that you can then pick through and edit.
The other thing of this guy, and I do, of all the videos, I have several videos linked to this, but this one I most highly recommend. The other thing he pointed out that is definitely true both journalistically and academically for me is as you start writing, you realize what you don't have. You get to a certain point and say, oops, I didn't ask that question. And so he's suggesting that you even start writing before you do all your research. Because if you don't know what it is that's important, you're not going to ask the right questions. You're going to do all of your research to say, I'm an idiot. I didn't ask that question. And I have found myself in that situation where I waited to write until I got done and realized I did not ask all the right questions to this. I just did that recently. I found out in my field that there's a huge demand for something that doesn't exist in America, and that is a professional doctorate in communications. It doesn't exist in America. And yet the industry wants it. And what I was surprised at, and this is where I realized I did not ask all the questions, was that about half of the professors who had an opinion also thought that. They thought there was a huge need within academia for a professional doctor. In other words, the equivalent of an MD or JD or whatever in other fields, that the PhD is not the end all of academia, that there is a point. And what my research, I described kind of what my idea of a professional doctorate would be in communication. And I said, okay, somebody who's trained in cross-departmental skills. So they're not just a journalist, but they understand HR, and they understand IT, and they understand management, and they understand sales, and they're also trained cross media. So they don't just understand the newspaper, they understand broadcasting, they understand new media. Would this sort of person be of value to you? And the industry said, yes, we need this sort of person. And like I said, the professors, half of those with an opinion said, yes, universities need this sort of person. And that's what shocked me, and what I realized when I realized, oops, because the big oops was, I did not ask what their background was. And I'm pretty sure in journalism, a lot of, as I was when I was 30 years old, a lot of professors are hired without a PhD because of their professional background. And in our field, it's different than most other fields, is that they highly, highly value professional background, even at the expense of a PhD. And so my guess is that those 50%, because it was not just like a 50% of those with an opinion, they had very strong opinions. And the 50% who were in favor of it among academics were strongly in favor of it. And those 50% of those with opinion that were opposed to it were strongly opposed to it, vehemently opposed to it. And here I'm sitting with this data, and I can't say something that I would like to be able to say. What's their background? Too late. I mean, I can go back and do some more research. I have to start from square one to find out a very important question. We have people in journalism academia that are loggerheads here. They have very, very strong feeling on a very important subject. Do we need a professional doctorate in communications? Anyway, I don't have some important data. If I had, in that case, it wasn't just a matter of pre-writing before any research, but probably doing testing my instrument. And then suddenly, maybe if I sent it out to 100 people instead of 2,000 people, I would have said, oops, with 100 people, and redesigned it before I sent it out to the rest of them. Yeah. So, but the writing process will get you to that oops moment. And I did not get to the oops moment until it's too late on that subject. So the writing process makes you think, analyze in ways that you don't if you're just looking at data. I mean, this is valuable, and I do it. I do the stuff that Dennis is talking about. But there's something about just jumping into the writing and start writing when you have that oops moment that, oh, I need this, I need that. And it will affect your research overall. And it may also impact, another place it might impact is what you decide to emphasize. You're writing along, you think you know what you want to write about. And suddenly, as you're writing, you say, you know, you have an aha moment. Instead of an oops moment, you have the aha moment. You say, aha, that's really important. That's different. That's not a common conclusion, which is what we're trying to accomplish with our, that's one of the main things you want to do with your academic writing is have an aha for your readers. And so you're writing, and that's when you have the aha. You thought you knew what you were writing about. And as you write, you get a new aha. And that's important. So that's more or less what this guy says in this video. And so I do recommend that he has other points too, but that's some of the main points I thought from his video. I wasn't going to play it all anyway, because it's over, I think it's about 30 minutes or something like that. So it wasn't something I wanted to take your time with. But anyway, these are some things then as you think about academic writing, could these elements be part of academic writing too? And I think in many cases they could be. In other cases, it would be difficult. I admit that. So I want to talk about some keys to effective academic writing, and kind of go, start at this foundation of trying to write simply. But I'm going to take some ideas from this Russian professor from Moscow Institute of Physics and Technology. I mentioned earlier as we got started that I took this course from her on Coursera. I didn't actually like the course in a way because I didn't like, they didn't do a good job of assessment. A lot of the questions didn't have the right answers. I mean, you could even type something in and put in an extra space, and it was kind of wrong. I mean, there were major problems with her use of the technology, which may not have been all her problem. It may have been other people's fault, but she has a lot of good content. I wanted to share some of the content that she had, and this is kind of, it looks like an hourglass, but kind of a design of a good academic article. She says, which you have a good opening, you present the challenge, you introduce the action. In her case, she does a lot of experimental research because she's a physicist, I think, or something like that. So in her field, they do a lot of experimental, which many of us would not do. But she describes the action of the research, the methodology, and what they did to come up with the data, and then draw a resolution to it. And it occurred to me as I looked at that, that's a novel. That's how you design a novel. You need to have an interesting opening. You create the challenge or the conflict. You create the action, and then you have a resolution, or a TV script, or lots of other writing too. It's really not that different. And in fact, this is in the way. Joshua Schimmel writes, you are not just presenting your results. You are telling a story. That to be an effective academic writer, you need to tell the story. And as you do that, this is another journalistic, we talked about a little bit already, another journalistic principle. The most important sentence in any article is the first one. If it doesn't induce the reader to proceed to the second sentence, your article is dead. William Sensor. And I think, again, that's a journalistic principle that should be considered by everyone who's writing academically as well. You can't read all of that. There's a KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid. This was actually, this acronym was, I didn't know this, was created during by the Navy in 1960s. They were designing new systems and stuff, and their motto became KISS. Just keep it simple. To make your system as easy as possible so nobody can screw it up. But that's also in the system of writing. is an important thing to remember too. Just keep it simple. A couple of golden rules that the Russian professor mentioned. Be clear, precise, and focused. That's a good journalistic approach. Keep your paragraphs and sentences short. Avoid unnecessary jargon. She doesn't say here, I don't think, but elsewhere, if you have to use jargon, define it, explain it. If you think there's anybody that's going to a reasonable number of people that would misunderstand it. For example, your writing maybe at least will be read by students. So don't write to the person with the most experience in your field. Don't write to the editor. There's research in journalism that does strongly support the idea that writing is a social phenomenon, that you're writing to somebody. You have somebody in your brain that you're writing to. In journalism, they found that if you have a strong editor, you're basically writing to the editor. And you're going to be very careful about your wording and being fair and unbiased and all this sort of stuff. If you don't have a strong editor, what they find that journalists start writing to this imaginary person, this damsel in distress, that they're going to go out and right the wrongs with their pen as their sword or whatever, and they start imagining somebody and they start losing their professionalism a little bit because they're out trying to right the wrongs of society. There's a lot of that in journalism nowadays. So anyway, my point is that that you are writing to somebody, and if you think you're writing to the editor, that may be the wrong person in this case. Think about the student that's going to read your article. Try to bring it down a little bit to a lower level so that everybody can understand it. And we're talking about making it readable and skimmable. You can still write about nuclear fusion, writing at the 9th grade level. I'm not saying that your academic writing should be at the 9th grade level, but it should be simple enough that certainly your university students can understand it. Because PhDs are not the only people who are going to be reading what you write. Frame and contextualize what you're writing. So, what is, again, trying to get to the point and make it make sense. Let your reader know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And define your terms immediately. I guess it goes back to jargon I was talking about after you mention them. So whether that's jargon or whatever, other big words or not frequently used words or terms or acronyms or anything else that you're using, if the vast majority of your possible readers don't understand what you're saying, then define it. So there's three aspects, according to the Russian professor, of a good story. One, content, what makes a story engaging and what keeps the reader with you as a science writer. Structure, how do you put together the content to make it readable, to make it interesting to the reader. And language, how do you write the story in the most compelling way possible. And I want to just run through those individually. So one is, figure out what it is you're writing about and focus on it. Focus on only one provocative thought that your reader did not have before. For that article that I wrote when I was 28, the provocative thought was, employers don't like what we're producing at the university. That's a provocative thought. And I think one of the reasons why the editor liked it is that, people better pay attention to this. And so figure out what is your provocative thought. Why did you write this? Why is this of value? What has nobody else said? And emphasize your provocative thought. If you don't have a provocative thought, why are you writing? There should be something there that will reach out and you can grab people with. There's some reason why your research was important. So focus on that. The second one is structure. How do you put together the content to make it readable, to make it interesting to the reader? And I just wanted to run through, because even some of these structural things can be simplified. What are the key points of writing a journal article, for example? Introduction. Again, find something that would drive, that first sentence is really important. So with your introduction, figure out what it is that's going to bring the reader into it. No matter how much we may complain about that being the case, that somebody is, is grabbing our, are getting published in the big journals and we're not getting there because they're slick, they're sneaky, they know how to write a title or whatever. It works. I mean, it is important. The title, the first sentence, the abstract, those things statistically make a huge difference as to whether you're going to be cited, whether people are going to read it, whether it's going to be accepted. Those are all very important. So, how are you going to start the very, again, that first sentence is so important. What is it that will drag them into the story and keep them going to the second sentence? Again, just re-quoting this one I used before, the most important sentence in any article is the first one. It does not matter, or if it doesn't induce the reader to proceed to the second sentence, your article is dead. And that goes back to the idea that people are skimmers, they're going to rush through this stuff. And so, whether it's one sentence or two sentences they're going to read, the point is, if you don't grab them, they're on to something else. In this day and age, there's so much competition for their attention, they're on to something else. And again, that one also, figure out that one provocative thought, center on it. Literature review. Again, state, it's pretty simple, state research questions and objectives. You need to know what they are as you do your literature review. Explain the objectives of the study, relate to the current knowledge, indicate the gap. That's what you're trying to get to. Where's the gap? What hasn't somebody explored yet? That's really maybe the most important thing is you've got to get to this point. Where is the gap? And then introduce what you're doing, how you're going to plug that gap. What are you going to do to fill up that gap? I mentioned in I think it was during Dennis's presentation that I am very concerned about the status of academic research right now, because all these big companies have grabbed up all the journals and we can't access them. If our library doesn't subscribe, it's going to cost us $38 per article to do our research. That is a major problem in academic research, because how are we going to know what the gap is? And how are we going to explain that? How are we going to justify our research if we haven't looked at all the relevant research? This is a problem if we can't access the current research. Universal rules: cite work from the journal to which the paper will be submitted. There are two things by going to the journal that you say you get an idea before you get very far into your writing as to who would you like to write for, because every journal is going to be different. And so again, the idea that it's a social phenomenon, your writing's a social phenomenon, part of that is, yes, what journal am I writing for? Because that journal does things certain ways. They break up their articles in certain, for example, do they write both a discussion and conclusion, or do they include the discussion, the conclusion in the discussion? Do they, there's different questions. Some journals organize things a little bit differently. What do they have a certain preference? Are there a certain type of article that they favor? Maybe it's the wrong journal altogether. The name sounded good, but they don't publish anything that I'm writing about. So maybe you decide it's not the right journal at all. So your selection of the journal becomes important. Anyway, meanwhile, if you want to get their attention, one thing to do is to cite their articles, because they're interested in getting their articles cited. And it also, at the same time, you're learning what it is that they're interested in, period. What are the sort of articles are they publishing? So if one of your articles is citing theirs, you can look at that literature review recently published in that journal. Hopefully they've done their literature review well. You're now going to cite them and say, okay, this guy did a great job doing this, but now he left this gap. I want to go on and study this matter further. So you get the editors and the reviewers' attention by the fact that you are now citing their article. Yeah?
Something I forgot to say, but in my own talk to this point, is that I don't think it's a good strategy to write a generic article and then submit it to journals. You have to tailor it to each specific journal. So of course, there's more time consuming, but that's, I don't know, is that your experience?
That's basically what she's saying, and I haven't done that enough. I admit that's one of my failings. I have not done that enough. And so, like I said, I was kind of out of academia for 30 years or whatever before I came to KIMEP, and the journals themselves have changed a lot, and I had to reintroduce myself to what journals like nowadays, rather than 30 years ago. It's different. And so individually, but even as kind of an industry or as a overall, how do they expect articles to be written now as opposed to when I was one of the most published researchers in America in 1980? Well, that's 1980. Guess what? A lot has happened since 1980. So obviously you want to include many papers from the domain within the past 3 years, so you want them recent. That's also important to you because then you not only finding out what their research was, but going back, and if you're in a situation where you can't access all the literature you'd like to access, at least the more you see other people literature review, you can kind of, okay, I can't get this one, but I see it's been cited by several different other authors, and if you trust them, that's not the best. But if you just financially cannot access all the articles you'd like to read, you may end up doing that, shortcutting a little bit and using somebody else's literature review. Again, that's not recommended by any means, but because of the situation in academic publishing right now, you may find yourself doing that. Cite papers that people in that domain see as important, and often cite them themselves. So again, that goes back to reading some of the articles, see what their literature review is, and incorporate some of their literature review more or less in yours. That doesn't mean, again, if you can, you want to go back and look at those specific articles. If there's any way you can, you want to see their articles. You have to be very careful. You can get caught in a trap and be very embarrassed if you cite somebody else's literature review and find out later they didn't do a good job of reviewing the literature. Now you've just made yourself a kind of a culprit in the whole thing, and you're going to be embarrassed by it. So that's why you can't recommend that. And the only reason why it would ever happen, it should ever happen, if there's any justification, is because of the current problem with academic publishing. That you can't afford, if you don't have access to it in your library, how can you access the top 20 articles and pay them $38 a piece? That's what I don't like. Anyway, and that's their final conclusion, though. Don't cite what you haven't read. But there's a big but, ... You have to decide what to do with that. And I can't, each one of us have to judge ourselves as to what we can afford to do. Self-citations. He says they're wonderful. Many of us are a little bit reluctant to cite our own work. She says, don't worry about it. It's good for your self-esteem, for your self-enhancement, self-promotion. You get cited in, you publish in one journal, you now cite yourself in another journal. It counts. And among other things, actually does your reader a favor, she says. Self-citation describes what you've done and saves your readers time tracking down your other papers. So if they like what you've written, they may want to see your other articles, and so you give them the information they need to get them.
There's only one little proviso here, and that is in the manuscript form, you are not supposed to write anything that might give away your identity. This is for the purposes of double-blind peer review. So in that case, when you're writing, then you put in name withheld to preserve the integrity of the review process. Then once the article is accepted, you put your name and your article back in. There's that little ethical part there.
I think it might be all right if you cited yourself as if you weren't you. wouldn't it be?
Yeah, you can do that too, as long as it doesn't give away your, you can do that too. This was covered in, you know,
I mean, it seems like it would give away more if you say, withheld. They would be, it must be his own writing. So if you include any content, you know what I mean? I mean, if you're saying name withheld, then the reviewer is going to think, oh, he's citing himself. And what else is he going to conclude from that?
no, you are, yeah, but you're being upfront about it.
Yeah.
Because you're not supposed to give away your identity.
So, and my point is, I think you'd give it away less if you cite yourself as if you weren't you.
Yeah, you can do that too.
But anyway, that's a point well taken. You need to be careful how you do it. But her point that I've always been reluctant to do it, but she says don't be reluctant. Go for it.
Yeah, that's judgment call there.
Yeah, it is. But it's interesting that that's her perspective anyway. There's another video here you could watch about literature review. Results and findings. Present your most important findings first. So again, within that section, same thing as you want them to, you want the best thing at first as you introduce your article. You also want the best part of your results as you introduce the results and findings. Establish the central point and then elaborate on it. So again, as you go through your findings, and you're not going to go in chronological order. There's no reason to go in chronological order. You want to get the best stuff first. You want to find a point to it and emphasize what is it that we found of importance, and emphasize that point. Tables and figures should be understandable at a quick glance. Very important to make sure your tables or your figures are very easily understood. And whatever you can use visually, a lot of people, they go first to the visual. And so the better you can summarize your research in that table or figure, the better. But make sure that it's a standalone. Do not, and within your writing, don't say the results are given in figure 1, for example. You can say something like, the reader will see in table 1 that, you can go ahead and talk about it, but the point she makes is that text and graphics should each stand separately and independently. So your story needs to tell at least the most important stuff. That doesn't necessarily mean your text will cover everything that's in the table. There may be parts of the table that you think, frankly, are not that important, but you think they should be included. So there may be some additional information in the table that you don't talk about, but certainly the most important parts that are in the table you talk about. You don't expect them to go to the table and get that information just strictly from the table. Your text stands alone. Your table stands alone in a sense of what it's what it's covering. It's clear. If they haven't read the information you give in your table, if they have not read your story, they still understand the table as much as possible. So if you can make them stand alone, that's what you should do. In the discussion, the projection isn't quite as wide as the screen here. A quote, occasionally I recognize what I call the squid technique. The author is doubtful about his facts and his reasoning and retreats behind a protective cloud of ink. And so you need to know and feel confident that what you're saying is important, and don't hide by your words. Again, going back to using the way you use words, make sure they're clear. If you're not confident that what you have is worth sharing, and you just kind of hide behind a cloud of ink, it's not going to be a successful article. In every type of communications, you have to believe that what you have is important. And if the first person you have to convince, I teach this to my students. I also teach advertising and sales. The first person you have to convince, if you're in sales, is yourself. And that's also true for this. You're selling, in a sense, maybe not for money, but you're selling your article to somebody. And the first person you have to convince that it's of value is yourself, and write accordingly. If you're not convinced, nobody else will be either. Do not avoid first-person pronouns. Many of us have done that. We felt like we shouldn't put ourselves into it. Now, not in the sense of identifying or revealing our identity, but in the sense of, we concluded that. I found that. That she says that it's not a problem using, the first-person pronouns. I've been reluctant to do it myself, but she assures me, and I will probably start doing it more.
That's the new American style. Yes.
Yeah, well, she's a Russian professor, so she's apparently. But
Well,
yeah,
don't say we if you are a single author.
yeah.
If you're co-author, then it's legitimate to say we.
In the Soviet times, it was kind of tradition to say about yourself as we, even you
The
are
royal we, yes.
Avoid such wordier, heavier constructions as "it was found in the current investigation that," or "it was concluded that." So in other words, that's what she's saying here is that's why you go ahead and use I and we. Is that otherwise you're left with this. You're left with using more words to say, to get to your point. I found this instead of "it was found that." Answer the research question, obviously. Support and defend answers with the results obtained. Explain conflicting results you obtain, unexpected findings, discrepancies with the research. State limitations of the research, state significant findings, establish novelty. What do you mean by, what do you think it means by that last phrase? What is she saying? Establish novelty. What's she saying with that?
Why researchers?
That you come right back to the same thing, right? Why is this important? Why is this different? How did this fill the gap? So you want to come back to that same conclusion. This is important because again, don't hide that, because if you hide it, if you're not, and hopefully you believe what you're saying. This is important because.
To that middle point there, don't be embarrassed if you have contradictory evidence. You just say the evidence is contradictory, but the evidence is vague or something. So it's perfectly fine to admit, yes, as Ken was saying, it's said there, the limitations. In fact, that makes you look credible.
It also opens new windows. It goes back to the idea of what new research can be done. I mean, in one way, I was just talking about my research on professional doctorate. On the one hand, I'm embarrassed that I didn't get all the data I needed. On the other hand, there's more research to be done. Is what's going on within universities in America, that we have this split, this big gulf between these professors and these professors in the communications departments. I think I know why, and I wish I could say why. I don't know why. I think I know why. And now I have another article to write, right? So, it's just, you're not going to answer everything, but hopefully what you found is important. In the discussion was a short summary, and again, going back to what you said before, state the significance of your research. Why is it important? Why is it unique? How did it fill the gap? So forth. And then the first shall be last, and last shall be first. The last thing that you're going to do is write the title and the abstract, and probably review your introduction. And maybe you may not even write your introduction immediately. You might start it again because you want a sense of where you're going. But you almost certainly, when you're done, will discover within your writing process, I didn't write the introduction right. I need to go back and rewrite the introduction. So the introduction will almost certainly be rewritten. But then also the title and the abstract, are vital to you being cited, vital to people reading what you have, and vital to you being cited. Again, you spend a lot of time figuring out these things. With the title, what makes the title draw citations, neither too long or too short. They're saying that they've done a research on this, and it should be somewhere in 30 to 40 characters. in that range. Otherwise, it's too long, and probably if it's shorter than that, probably too short, but I'd rather have too short than too long, such as the title of that book I co-authored. A couple of authors in studying this say a good title is the fewest possible words that adequately describe the content of the paper. So get to the point, and when he says I would maybe amplify that, the content of the paper, again, what part? What content of the paper? The part that makes it unique and interesting. So you want to get to that in your title as quickly as you can, as short as you can. Meanwhile, the abstract, 150 to 200 words that reflect the entire work. Purpose of the study, brief statement of what was done, referring to the methods, a brief statement of what was found, and a brief statement of what was concluded. So basically it's a summary of the whole thing, but very quick, very brief, very summarized. And again, very important to do it well. It is a self-contained unit capable of being understood without the benefit of the text. So again, as we were talking about with tables and the text, you want to make sure the abstract is standalone, that it adequately summarizes and doesn't require the reading of the text to understand what it's all about. Avoid words with broad meaning, and in the keywords we're talking about now, try to choose words that will bring people to your writing. This is true in marketing too. I teach another aspect I teach to my students. A guy's made about $1 million doing YouTube videos, marketing videos. They're stupid videos, 1 minute long videos about something like, how to lose weight from your hips. But he's very precise about his keywords, and he's very short, get to the point, and he gets lots of hits on the search engine. And when they come to him, he's closing. He's selling to most of the people that come to his website because of his stupid little videos. And now he's one of the big names in marketing because he figured out how to use just a standard free YouTube video to drive people to his websites and turn them into clients. Well, this is not marketing in that sense, but in a way, the keywords are a marketing tool for you. And just as in his case, don't just say dieting. You'll get maybe lots of hits, but nobody's going to count. You'll get a billion hits. If you say dieting on a YouTube is the second most used search engine in the world. Even though it's only about their videos, it's used so much, it is only second to its parent Google search engine. And so you say diet on a YouTube search, you're going to have a million hits on that thing. Who's going to find you? The likelihood of you getting to page 1 of the search is minimal. And indeed, that's the whole point of it. Like in Google, again, it's different, a little different in academia, but it's the same principle. If in Google, if you're not on page 1 of a Google search, then 80% of the people will not even go to page 2. And so it's very few people will have any chance of seeing you if you're not on page 1. And so if you're not really precise in your keywords in a Google search, for example, you're on page 2 or 3 or 4 or 100. They're not going to find you. And in fact, what they found is that 60% of people don't go past the first 3 items in the search engine. First 3. And so while it may be a little different between a Google search and a search within an academic search engine, it's the same principle. The more precise you are, the more likelihood that you will get on the top of the search. If you're vague, then you're just one of 100 or 200 or 1,000 or 2,000 documents that they could look at, and the likelihood of you being on page 1 is very remote. So you're hoping that when somebody does their search, that you will use the keywords that will be precise enough to get you to the front, but they're also the ones then that are most likely to cite you more likely to use your material because they have been precise in their search. Anyway, so also don't use the same words in your title. Your title is going to automatically be used in the search. So your other keywords will not be words in your title. Last thing, among the 3 aspects of a good story, language. How do you write the story in the most compelling way possible? I just wanted to include a few things here that we've been talking about already in simplicity. I know Dennis talked about the other day. These, for example, are phrases. They're very frequently found in scientific writing. So these are specific to academic writing that we find people saying. A considerable amount, rather than much, or in order to instead of to do, or a considerable number instead of many. We tend to not just use bigger words, we try to use lots of words to sound smart. Okay, and so these words that we think makes it sound smart. These words are more understandable. And there's 3 slides of these that you can take a look at. This is already on the L drive. I'm going to take some of the garbage I put in the folder out of it. But under my name in the L drive, there's one called, I think, just a seminar in academic writing or academic writing seminar, something like that. So you can find these yourself. But this is, I don't think we need to go spend a lot of time on these, but this is the problem we're talking about. How to make your writing more simpler. Part of it is the words you choose, yes. And part of it is how many words you use to say something simple. So we tend to use these to sound smart, and we could say those and sound clear. And the more of those you string together, the more, within an article, the more difficult it is to skim and to understand and so forth. So we complicate our writing in many ways in trying to sound smart, and we don't need to. So I'll let you look at those on your own. She has, we're cut off here on the left a little bit, but she makes some interesting points about verb tenses. 3 tense form, there are 3 tense forms, either, that's something I didn't mean to use. Anyway, what I was getting to is the present tense, simple tense is used 70% of the time in academic writing. There's only 3 tenses hardly used at all. These 3 tenses, present simple tense, past simple tense, and present perfect tense, make up 98% of the verbs in academic writing, according to this study. And most of that is present simple. Present simple, as it explains here, and again, this is cut off a little bit. What it's explaining here is that it's used, for example, in the introduction. It's used most of the time in the, let's see here, as you, describe what you're doing, why you're doing it, and so forth. It's even used most of the time in your conclusion as to what you, what's important and so forth. The present simple tense is the most used. 70% of the verbs you'll use will be present simple, according to research. Past simple is more for the writing about maybe a special study implemented by a well-known scientist. So you're talking about that specific and explaining why that was that study was so important in overall understanding of this field, for example. It is also used in describing your methods. So your methodology will mostly be using past simple tenses. Your present perfect, not used very much, but still more than all the other tenses that are almost never used, is used to summarize the results of studies carried out previously. So a lot of this is to be found in your literature review. So you're saying that researchers have found, studies have found. So you're using your present perfect tense to go through a lot of the literature review, for example. Fuzzy verbs, verbs that are kind of vague and not real strong. I don't totally agree with all of, move this out of the way here. You can see it. But I'm not sure that some of these are necessarily a lot better on the left side than on the right side in every case. I might argue in some cases. But the idea, I think, is good. You can study this list to kind of get some idea of stronger verbs that you could use as you explain your research. There's another video that you might want to take a look at. And kind of concluding, I'm going to move this up here now out of the way. So 3 main points that I would like to make is reasons why academic writing should benefit or would benefit by being simplified, readability and skimmability. Everyone, including academics, are in a hurry. The simpler we write, the easier and quicker it is for anybody to skim or read our article as they might prefer. That's one of the conclusions I came to back when I was 28 years old and wrote that first article. Is guess what? Even the PhDs prefer simple writing. They may not write simply, but they prefer reading simply. And so, and I think that
teachers do too, I think. And our students.
Yeah.
Clear and simple.
Everybody likes it. So the simpler you can make it, and so don't try to sound smart. Try to sound clear. Another reason is more likely to be grammatically correct. We talked about that already, but especially for writers for whom English is not their native language. Shorter sentences, simpler paragraphs, and shorter, more common words will be more likely to avoid misuse and misspelling of words, errors in punctuation, and incorrect grammar. Again, get back to some of the subtleties of a language that those who are learning a second language or third language or fourth language, whatever it may be for you, you may find yourself in the trap of not understanding all the connotations of a certain word. And so in your effort to sound smart, you don't sound smart. And it's not necessary. What I found is not necessary to sound smart. It's one of the biggest traps that anybody makes, including a native speaker. So again, that's where I found myself in a trap way back when I was taking the composition courses in English. I was trying to sound smart. And I had to take journalism courses to teach me to sound clear, not smart.
I have an experience here too with a teaching assistant at the University of Toronto. The 2 absolutely worst essays I ever wrote or read were written by native speakers. In that class, I had, as in Toronto encountered many immigrants, quite a few essays written by people whose English was not the first language. I'm not too hung up about concerned about precise, grammar or whatever. If you have good content and if there's plan, one of this is mentioned. If I see evidence of planning in the essay, things are put in the right place, the overall conceptualization is good, then I was very forgiving of that, and I think editors too. In the modern day, now there's more recognition that more works are being published in the English language worldwide by non-English speakers. So if you make the odd, a little grammatical slip or something, I think that's kind of forgivable for non-English speakers. As long as the piece as a whole is interesting, well organized, and makes sense. So I wouldn't be too intimidated by the fact that, or discouraged by the fact that you're not English native speakers.
I think the thing that's unforgivable is if the editor can't understand what you're saying. And that's what I'm finding. Like I'm working on a thesis right now, or reviewing a thesis with one of my students, and paragraph after paragraph, I have no idea what she's talking about. She tried to sound smart, and she makes no sense. And so I'm going back with it, and we're going over the whole thing with her. And one of the things I told her just the other day as we sat down with it is, read it to yourself. Especially now, sometimes if you have time to walk away, journalists don't always have time to do it. But walk away from it and now try to read it with new eyes, I call it, as if it's not you were writing. And sometimes it helps to read it out loud. You read it out loud and suddenly say, what did I mean by that? And so if you have to figure out what you meant by that, then you sure as heck better change it. And so I challenged her to do that, is read her entire thesis out loud to herself and ask herself, how clear that is, because it's, that's the part that's not forgivable. In her case, every word was an understandable word, and put them all together, it was not understandable. And so part of it was long phrases, complicated writing, some cases the wrong word. It is a word, but not the right word. Words with the wrong connotation. Put it all together, and what did you mean? And so paragraph after paragraph, I'm having to go through that with her because she was trying to sound smart and not clear. And the last point, just bottom line, is if it's clear, if you have good content, it's more likely to be published. So concentrate on clarity and content. Make sure, be confident that you have written something that is different, that is unique, that it has value to it. Write it clearly, and it's likely to be published. Don't try to sound smart. Don't bury what's important in a bunch of words and make somebody dig for it. Make it clear, make it quick, make it make it in your first sentence. Make sure your first sentence is clear and it's including the most important stuff. Again, when you get to your results, most important stuff first. Get to your conclusion, most important stuff last. Pretty much, and maybe you kind of lead to it, but that should be the thing they also go away from your article with. This is why this is important, and why we need to write it in our journal. Then go to the abstract, what's important, make sure it's there. Go to the title, what's important, and try in as few words as possible, say what's important about your article in your title. That's the same thing we do in journalism all the time. That's what we have to do. That's what we're paid to do. Editor he's responsible for writing headlines for all the stories and the pages he edits and designs. And the bottom line of it is, don't make it vague, get to the point, tell why it's important, help the reader to know why they should read this article. Then look at that lead, make sure the lead has been written well, first paragraph. And same thing, make sure it tells the story, make sure it's interesting and will draw the reader into it and get them to that second sentence. As was said by one of the people cited here, if they're not attracted by your first sentence, they won't get to the second sentence. And that may be a little bit of an exaggeration. There's not much of one. There really isn't much of one. That's basically what I covered. I suspect that people don't want to stay for the exercise. Basically, I also had the opportunity I've had some opportunities to edit other professors here at KIMEP. And I basically had to do this for them, very smart professors. What they had to publish, in fact, the one I was going to show you, since I'm not going to show it to you, I can tell you it was published in a highly respected journal, but he's not a native English writer, and so he wanted me to help him. So he had done some stuff for me, so I said, okay, edit. The first time through, I don't think they accepted his article right away. I mean, that was content. That wasn't me. That was content. And they made very few requests for rewriting, except what I didn't go over adequately were his footnotes. He had lots of footnotes. And I thought, footnotes. I don't need to read footnotes. That's what they came back and said, we need these footnotes clarified. So I did all this work in helping him clarify all the other issues in the article, and I hadn't clarified the content of the footnotes, and so we had to, after it had been accepted, we had to go through and rewrite footnotes. But it's basically the same problems. I can tell you that, for example, this came down to about 3 sentences. It took a while to get it there, and a couple of tries at it. How short can we make that footnote? There's a lot of stuff there, and I kind of the same question I had with my student. What do you mean by this? And so it took me a while to reduce this down to a lot shorter, a lot simpler, a lot clearer material, and he had an excellent publication out of it. Again, most of it was his content. But if you have great content and people are asking themselves, what does he mean by that? You're going to have problems. And so, yeah.
As a personal favor to me, can you zip back to the beginning of your slide presentation, just so I can see what I missed?
Sure. You didn't miss a lot of slides, I don't think, but you did miss quite a few, as we discussed it quite a bit. Because what I was explaining to them was, this was a letter I got from an editor. Again, I would co-author with somebody else, but I did all the work, and so this is what we were bouncing from. I was blown over.
They said this, but yours was so interesting and well written, and we finally published it.
Yeah.
Okay,
I was in my first.
oh, we have a stack on our own. Wow.
I was in my first semester of my master's studies, and so I was shocked, like, that way. So that made me think a lot when we got that letter, and I knew I'd done essentially all the work. The idea was the professors, and I did all the work. So because, as I mentioned earlier, my thinking as he asked me to help him was, who am I to be writing an academic article?
Ken made a good point. He says about in one point, start writing. I had a fortunate experience. I wrote an essay. Well, this was a doctoral, just a course paper for my doctoral program. I thought it turned out quite well. It was, first of all, factual. I wasn't proving any theoretical point. It was just, basic narrative, descriptive analysis of the topic. And so then I looked for a journal that dealt with that topic, about set topics and themes, and submitted it to that journal. In my naivete, it was a social science citation index journal. That is a top-ranked journal, and they took it without revision. That's the first and best, easiest publication I've ever done. Ever since then, they've always asked for revisions, these small revisions. But I really lucked out. In my naivete, if I had known it was a top journal, I probably wouldn't have said it then. They didn't have the confidence. But sometimes you just get lucky. Yeah, but it did have some of these elements: clarity, simplicity, an interesting story. It had those things.
Yeah, which is, like I say, sometimes maybe we know too much, and it gets us in trouble.
Well, yeah, it goes back to what I mentioned last week. Better be careful with the journals, because some, they will take kind of more factual things or topical things, and others, they want more theoretical discussion, because they see the contribution of their journal as advancing the theory, whereas others might see it as advancing the knowledge. So you do have to be careful with the frames of reference with the journals. But I think more and more they are, well, it's kind of, yes, it's another sickness of, I think, modern academia, the tendency to over-theorize. And unfortunately, journals tend to do this. I sometimes, I get manuscripts for review, and one of the comments I make is this is over-theorized. But I understand them, these contributor students, because that's how they're taught in modern North American university. It's kind of load up all this with fancy theory to show that you're smart. I think there's too much of that, but that's kind of the environment we operate.
Well, that's one of the things that I had to adjust to as I came back to academia. This was the start of the article that I wrote at the time, and that would have been. It may be difficult to write it this way today for lots of journals, because actually I gave no theory in this one, and I'm not sure still. 30 years later, I redid the research because I wanted to show kind of have a longitudinal perspective on it. This is what the professional said 30 years ago, around 1980. This is what they say in 2010. And I thought it had lots of importance just from that perspective, and that was the comment I got back from a couple of journals. We need theory here. We need theory. This is just fact, okay? Well, what's the theory behind it? We know that the employers are saying, and they've said it for now over 30 years, that we're not doing a good job. And they're saying this is what we need to do a better job of teaching our students. What theory is that? I still question how much theory can fit into this subject. But
Well, if we have time, I have another humorous story. When I was writing my doctoral dissertation at the University of Toronto, I wrote it for a senior academic. Was my supervisor. He was well established, competent person with a lot of good common sense. The writing went well. But then for my defense, was he on the defense committee? I had a younger professor, fresh, Canadian, but fresh out of Stanford University or someplace in California, where they had taught him, this fancy, this theory. So he said, oh, yeah, so all the senior professors on the committee, they had no problems with my introduction. They had a little, bit of literature use and introduction, contextualization. None of the senior established professors had a problem with this. But this younger guy, he wanted me to kind of beef this up with a bit more theory. So to make sure that I would have an easy defense, I added about 6 or 7 pages of, further discussion of literature, blah, blah, blah. Went to the defense went smoothly. Then I wanted, as I did, to have the dissertation published as a book for the University of Toronto Press. And the first thing, they had a little handout explaining the difference between the dissertation and the book. One of the first things they said is, if you want to publish this as a book, what you said in the book is throw out all of this theory. So I had to. So then I did that. I cut up those 6 or 7 pages, and I had the book published.
well, and that's interesting, and I'll tell you why it happened. Book publishers, were they aiming at? They're not aiming it at the same people as this, this reviewer that demanded more theory. They're looking at more from who's going to read this, who's going to want to read this.
The word for that is audience. Yeah, so another kind of common sickness of modern academia is that academics write for other academics and not the ultimate audience.
Yeah. That's kind of what I said earlier, is that
what journal you are sending to, whether it is inclined to scientific ones, to academics, to journalists. It depends on the audience.
it is, but don't be trapped by it either. I mean, on the one hand, Dennis had to get this passed, need to get his dissertation approved. On the other hand, if we're writing something that nobody's going to want to read, what's the point of writing it? So I mean, I'm more of a pragmatist in that, as I'm a little bit kind of rebel against the attitude of, like I say, this article that 30 years later. What theory? This is the employers don't like what you're doing. That's the theory. So, and they didn't like it 30 years ago. They still don't like it. So, it to me sometimes the other academics are hung up on something that is almost absurd. They're so hung up on it, they're missing the whole point. This has no real theory. This is reality. The employers don't like our students, our graduates. That's the reality. Forget about the theory. I don't care about the theory. They don't like it. So anyway, I think we'll stop there. Thank you. And for those that I started off, some of you came in late, but we video recorded this whole thing on screencast.
That's okay. About the videos on YouTube, I have found that video on my telephone now. Yeah, we will see that afterwards.
Yeah. That's why I put. Well, this whole thing will be on the L drive.
Oh my gosh, the way I was slouching.
Now, except I did not use real video. I'm just actually, the only thing it's recording after I did start off with my webcam with my face on it, introducing myself. And then I turned off the webcam, and so all it's seeing is what you're seeing up here. The screencasting. So it's catching our voices, hopefully. But other than that, it's catching mostly PowerPoints, and when I went other places to Word documents and so forth, it's recording all of that as well. It records whatever it sees on the screen, it records.
Thank you very much.
Maybe your signature here.